Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to you all, and thank you so much to the African Business Chamber, Moses, Yomi, and others for the kind invitation to join you, albeit remotely, at this second Africa-China Business Summit. I would like to first apologize to you all and the organizers profusely for not being able to be with you in person. I tried very hard, but unfortunately, due to an unforeseen emergency meeting which I have to attend tomorrow, I'm currently on a flight as this is being broadcast to you. However, I hope, even from the sky, I can provide clear enough information and ideas worthy of your time today and inspire you all to continue to do more for Africa-China relations. My name is Hannah Ryder, Rui Wanjie in Chinese, and I'm the CEO of an international development consultancy called Development Reimagined. It's a wholly foreign-owned enterprise headquartered in Beijing, where I've lived for the last 5 years, and we have small offices in Kenya, where I'm from, as well as the UK, where I lived from the age of 10. I initiated the consultancy after close to 15 years of working in the UN and in government, and we are growing every day, in particular due to the expertise we have cultivated in a very important but very under-supported area, Africa-China relations. Today I have the great pleasure to share with you my thoughts on why Africa is the next frontier for development, and in so doing essentially share my views on the opportunities for Chinese stakeholders to invest and create partnerships in African countries and thereby deliver on China's Belt and Road Initiative, first announced in 2014, and the other way around, opportunities for African stakeholders to work with and in China to achieve our development goals. But before I share those opportunities, let me share with you why I believe such partnerships are important, why Africa represents that frontier for development. The African continent is now the home of 395 million poor people, the world's majority. The continent has the largest number of landlocked countries in the world, and 33 of the 55 countries are classified as least developed. This challenge is real, and it shows in our relationships with other countries. Trade volumes to and within the continent are poor. Africa accounts for less than 4% of China's trade, even less for the US. Even within the region, only 10% of trade is inter-African trade. It's an even worse picture for exports to other countries specifically. The 55 African countries together account for only 3% of the imports of the largest 20 countries in the world. Of this 3% total, it's countries with abundant natural resources, such as Nigeria and Angola, that dominate. 29 countries account for less than 1% each. The 29 include countries such as Rwanda and Senegal, who are investing millions to get ahead in trade and investment competitiveness. Even Ethiopia, the African country that Chinese factories tend to know best, only exports 2% of the overall 3%, going to the largest 20 countries in the world. There are similar patterns for overseas investment. In 2017, Africa as a whole attracted less than 3% of the world's new flows of foreign direct investment. That's about the same as what India and Switzerland attracted each on their own. And the story is fairly similar with regards to tourism. Africa gets very little volume and value compared to the rest of the world. But this is not just a doom and gloom story. I'm here to show why this is actually an exciting and interesting opportunity, not just a problem. We are business people after all, so here is the good news. First, African governments and businesses are committed to green growth and industrialization. If China is the world's current manufacturing hub, then the African Union's Agenda 2063 envisions Africa firmly as the world's future manufacturing hub. African governments are working on creating green transport links, including rail, to encourage this, and they're also creating special economic zones, often in partnership with Chinese local provinces and contractors, to attract foreign direct investment in a planned and managed manner. UNCTAD has estimated that there now are 186 special economic zones and industrial parks across Africa. My firm has been advising on just 3 of these in Kenya, Ethiopia, and Rwanda, with a view to ensuring they have a green and sustainable foundation, using clean energy, top-spec waste and water treatment equipment, and so on. Some governments and businesses are looking at promoting green ecotourism. All of these should be helpful for growth and jobs, as well as climate friendly. Second, African countries, although government leaders are old, mostly have young populations who are very dynamic, entrepreneurial, and ready to work and consume. The middle class is rising rapidly. Africa's population is currently 1 billion people, but by 2050 will be 2.5 billion strong, compared to China at only 1.3 billion and India at 1.7 billion. There is a huge potential employment and consumer market there. Hence, at the business end, domestic and international brands are starting to focus on building green and sustainable supply chains, empowering farmers and artisans to find sustainable markets for their products and add more value to them by transforming them into finished products that can be sold within Africa as well as exported globally. Third, Africans are also technology savvy and entrepreneurial. Part of this is due to a lack of existing infrastructure as well as formal structures, large government for instance. But this can be a great strength. Witness the use of mobile banking across the continent, starting in Kenya in 2007, well before China's WeChat took off. Mobile phones are used for all sorts of needs by farmers and city dwellers, and many new apps from healthcare to music are developed in-country by clever young programmers. But there is much more untapped potential, for instance, using the Internet of Things for tourism or using it to manage productivity on larger farms. These needs to shift global patterns in favour of Africa and 3 unique factors about African countries present great opportunities for both African and Chinese businesses separately as well as together. And from the Chinese side, of course, there's the Belt and Road Initiative. To date, 40 African countries have signed memorandums of understanding with China on the Belt and Road. 15 African countries are members of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and South Africa was a founding member of the New Development Bank. These provide opportunities for China to enhance its support for African development for this next frontier. But how exactly? I'm not a person that likes to just provide facts and background. I also like to provide food for thought, ideas for action. So here it goes. Let me propose 3 specific opportunities for you today, for you to consider as you take part in the rest of the Business Summit. I'll summarize them as follows. 1. There's an opportunity for African countries to understand and explore innovative policies and ideas that China used in its development, and work with Chinese partners to adapt them in the African context. 2. There's an opportunity for stronger Chinese foreign direct investment in African countries, including through public-private partnerships. And 3. There's an opportunity for African products to enter the Chinese market more firmly and aggressively. Let me explain all 3 briefly, as they all have the potential to help accelerate Africa as the frontier for development. First, let's look at China's development experience. Is it worth exploring or adapting? I've been doing some recent vlogs on this based on visits to villages in other parts of China, and my overall answer is yes. It's not just about the tall buildings and the glitzy wealth that you see around you. It's much more than that. It's a different mindset about the process of development. Development driven by infrastructure as its basis, by a focus on developing industry and adding value, rather than on inputs such as medicines, school books, or fertilizers. The Chinese ask, what is the point of going to school if there's no return to education? What is the point of farming if you don't have a decent, predictable, and lucrative market for your products? Can you really give huge tax breaks to all overseas investors if you aren't collecting much tax from your mostly informal businesses in the first place? China's e-commerce experience is applicable to other fast-growing poor countries. China offers a chance to rethink, reimagine some of the ideas that we all have about this linear process of development, and thus reimagine African development as well as a non-linear process that requires strong problem solving. As a Kenyan, I often find Chinese thinking and the structure of its economy somehow fairly similar. There's a great deal of potential here, as I said, to accelerate Africa as a frontier of development just by this exchange of experience. But you and I are business people. Exchange of experience is great, but ultimately we care about action. So let me get to this second point quickly, the opportunity for stronger Chinese foreign direct investment in African countries, including through public-private partnerships, to accelerate African development. There are so many specific opportunities for this, it's difficult to know exactly where to start. Energy and real estate projects are hugely exciting and have huge profitability, although they come with some risks. But let me drill down on investment into logistics, because logistics is critical to trade and therefore to business. There are abundant opportunities for logistics investment, from the large $100 million size to the small $5 million size and below. Also, I don't need to say it, but let me say it just to be clear, Africa is not one country. Many African countries are landlocked, have different qualities, levels of ports, roads, and so on. Different pricing points mean opportunities. If investors can find a way to upgrade certain routes, it can be profitable. For instance, I was in Rwanda in July, where Chinese investors complain that the cost of standard container from Mombasa or Dar es Salaam to Rwanda is around $2,000, almost equal to the cost from Shanghai to East Africa. Solving this problem for exports out of the region, as well as across countries in the region, is key and would have a decent margin. There are currently 64 ports across the continent, many of which are being upgraded and more being added. Other routes are hoping to be made more efficient through a continental air transport agreement and a free trade agreement, the largest in the world, signed just earlier this year. Africa has a quarter of the world average of internal roads. Of course, the continent is considerably larger than China, but it's got less than half of its rail network. Think of being the first mover in nascent markets like this. If companies can use motorbikes or even drones to deliver food or other goods at scale to rising middle-class consumers, there's a profit to be made. Jumia, the continent's best e-commerce platform, is available in cities in Nigeria and Kenya, but it's nowhere near as efficient as JD or Waimai because it hasn't yet got the logistics right. Ethiopia and Nigeria are the only cities so far in the entire continent with light rail. There is so much opportunity. Let me now come to the final third opportunity to enhance the next frontier for African products to enter the Chinese market more firmly and aggressively. Indeed, the Belt and Road Initiative is not just about China going out. It's also about what is coming into China. If Chinese factories relocate abroad, whether to make toys or shoes, they need to easily maintain the markets they had before. And with the US-China trade war, there's an opportunity for African countries, as well as Latin America and established markets like Europe or Australia, to get a foothold. For instance, Chinese consumers are increasingly demanding organic, clean, and unique products. And African countries are a great source for this. An Ethiopian coffee company recently used blockchain to increase its efficiency as well as gain market share by showing its consumers that it was organic and its workers had been paid well. This coffee, in addition to coffee from Rwanda, beef from Namibia, beef from Botswana, and several other places, should all be coming into China. But it's also not just about raw products. In fact, if African countries continue to rely on raw products and let this be the dominant trade flow to China, that will be hugely problematic. Look at cocoa. West Africa produces over 75% of the world's cocoa, yet only 5% of the value of the $100 billion worth market comes back to West Africa. That shouldn't happen with China, and its upper and middle class consumers that are abundant in Shanghai and elsewhere should be providing more. Coming into the market firmly and aggressively means trademarking and then pushing added value products into China, manufactured products back into China through e-commerce platforms as well as physical stores. African brands from coffee shops to fashion brands should be available right here in China, set up as wholly foreign-owned enterprises, just like my business is. There is no impediment to this. It's a case of vision and cost, of course. And governments can support these efforts by subsidizing the costs, or making sure China, for instance, recognizes and respects trademarks and intellectual property, just like it's increasingly doing for the US and Europe. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your patience and interest in listening today, despite the fact that I'm in the sky right now and unable to be with you in person. The evidence is clear. Africa is the next frontier for development, and there are many paths and opportunities for that development. As a consultancy focused on facilitating, reimagining sustainable development and poverty reduction in Africa and elsewhere, our hope is to stimulate other businesses and organizations from African countries, China and elsewhere to join us. Where others might see problems, we see opportunities for action and solutions. I'm sure that together we can see this frontier through and ensure that Africa develops at an even faster pace than China has. Let's dream big. Thank you all and have a great rest of the summit. 谢谢大家。